Good morning, Year 9, and welcome back to Week 8. First of all, I would just like to say thank you. There were some really good quiz scores last week across the classes. Lots of 100% people that you could see were beating their class averages. So we had a lovely range of 100%. We had within each class people beating their class average. So it was really good. We say thank you very much for doing those quizzes, and we really appreciate that you show actually in that how well you've done that week and what you've learned, because this is a new topic. It is, remember, a GCSE topic. It's going to lead to an outcome for your GCSE, and it's really encouraging to see you guys doing your best. So this week we are building on the knowledge from last week. We're still looking at rhetoric, the art of persuasive speaking, and we're looking this week then, so this is week 8, and we're looking at session 1. Okay, and today then, just to warm us up and get started, we introduced the Aristotelian triad, and we said that there are 3 points on this triad. So your warm up, just to kind of engage brain, what are the 3 points of the Aristotelian triad, and what does each mean? Okay, so just pause the screen. You don't have to, you can draw it like a triangle, you can create the image, you can just list the 3 points of the triad and what does each mean, and we'll have a little look at your answers together in a minute. Okay, so here are our answers. So we began this process by looking at the ethos appeal of this triad, the ethos. That's about the speaker. So if you imagine I'm the speaker and you're my audience, me creating a degree of credibility and trust. There's some other things that we looked at within that. So that idea of creating a sense of knowledge, you trusting that I was an expert, that I have knowledge of the subject. There, I genuinely care about what I'm talking on, that there's a sense of authenticity, that I genuinely care, that I'm genuine, that you can trust me, that you can like me, that you can see I'm a good person. So we began our journey with ethos, the idea of credibility and trust. We then said that the other 2 really are about how my presentation of myself makes you think and feel stuff. Okay, so really once you know you can trust me and I've got credibility, it's my job then to make you think and feel stuff. Okay, so appealing to your logos, that's me making you think, okay, stuff. And I would use logic, reason, truth, facts, statistics, in order to appeal to your logos, your sense of logic, reason, and truth. I might use a syllogism, the presentation of facts to take you to an outcome, a conclusion. Okay, so with logos, then I was appealing to your beautiful minds, your rational part of you, your rational thinking part. However, we recognize humans are complex creatures, and you've also got your emotions. Now, we didn't really look within the learning at the idea of where values and belief systems come from, but that is a part of it as well. We were really focusing on the emotional appeals. So using emotive language, using anecdote and story to create an emotional bridge, an emotional connection. Okay, so we had pathos, logos, and ethos. So if you were right in those 2 areas, brilliant, just tick yourselves right. If you'd made any mistakes, just make a quick note so you're always moving forward with the right learning, the right information. Okay, so that was the beginning. That's our Aristotelian triad. Okay, so what comes next? Well, this week we're focusing more on the how. Okay, we're looking at how then speakers craft and construct speeches that use particular figures, particular rhetorical figures, in order to achieve those outcomes. So that's what we're really focusing on this week, more about the how it's done. Okay, and our big question today is, what is a rhetorical figure? Now, guys, if we piece this together, we already know that rhetorical then is persuasive speech. So it's saying then, what are some of these persuasive figures of speech? Some of these devices, and how can we use rhetorical figures effectively? So how can we use them so that they work to their best capacity? Okay, now just whilst you're writing down today's title and date, what is a rhetorical figure and how we can use them effectively? The truth is we can use things ineffectively, badly. One of the classics that we're taught really early on, often a little bit out of context without understanding the Greek context of rhetoric, is the rhetorical question. But we also know then that a rhetorical question is a rhetorical figure. It's a figure of speech that originated from rhetoric, that originated from Athens, that was part of Aristotle's book and kind of suggestion of what makes the art of persuasive speaking, the art of rhetoric. But sometimes we overuse the rhetorical question and we use it where maybe a direct question would be more purposeful, or we use it in the wrong way. So as we go through this, we are going to look at some new rhetorical figures, but we're going to think about, well, how do we use them effectively? So hopefully, guys, that's given you a moment to write down your title. What is a rhetorical figure? How can we use them effectively? If you haven't, just pause the screen at this stage and rejoin us when you're ready. Okay, guys, so a rhetorical figure is a phrase that is designed to be persuasive, memorable, and striking. Okay, so this bit, again, in a minute, you can write it down. A rhetorical figure is a phrase that is designed to be persuasive, so influential, memorable, and striking. Now, we already maybe have been set up to understand that rhetorical speaking, is persuasive speech. It's speech designed to influence the listener. But if you look at the memorable and striking part, what we have to remember is context again. Guys, when this was originally being used, people were speaking, okay? They were delivering their speeches, but nobody could record it. Nobody had a mobile phone and was quickly recording it. There weren't film and camera crews there from the BBC making an archive record of the speech. The only way that the listeners would remember the speech is based on what they remembered in that moment. They couldn't go back 2 days later and say, oh, can you guys, can you just do that speech again? I'd really like to hear it again. So actually, a key aspect of rhetoric is memory. How do we not only make what we're saying persuasive and influential, how do we make it memorable? How are people going to remember what we're saying? So some of these devices actually are also about appealing to memory, making something memorable as well as influential. And this third thing, that a rhetorical figure is designed to be striking. Okay, now if you imagine that verb choice, striking, to strike, when you strike a match, when you strike ground, when you strike out. Striking is again tied in with this thing that has impact. Because actually, if you're a speaker and you're stood in front of a crowd, if you've ever seen the amphitheaters in the ancient Greek times where these speeches would be delivered from, they had the capacity to hold thousands. And the speaker would be one little person in the middle of thousands of people. So they've got to be persuasive, memorable, and striking. They have to do something that resonates, that connects with the audience and makes it memorable. So all of these rhetorical figures are actually how language was crafted and adapted to achieve those three outcomes: to be influential and persuasive, memorable so people don't forget it, and striking so it's impactful. Okay, now again, if you see this page, you can see there's a lot of information on here. I don't want you to write everything. I want you to listen, and then I will direct you to pause this screen and make notes. Okay, my lovelies? So, number one rhetorical figure, antithesis. Say that quickly early in the morning, guys. Get a little bit of a lisp going on. Antithesis. Now, it says here that antithesis is a simple rhetorical figure. Antithesis is when you mention one thing, then you mention another. But generally with antithesis, the two things you mention are opposites. Okay? So here's an example from Neil Armstrong. Can you see the elements that are opposites? That's one small step for a man and one giant leap for mankind. Can you see those opposites? Let's be honest, I've given you a few clues. So what's the opposite of small? Giant. What's the opposite to a step? A leap. Now, if we break it down, we've got to mention one thing. So the first thing mentioned is that's one small step for man. What's the second thing? One giant leap for mankind. But the two elements, okay, are small and giant, step and leap. And that antithesis creates an influential, memorable and striking phrase. We all remember this famous Armstrong phrase from when he landed on the moon. So guys, I just want you to pause the screen there. Again, I want to invite you not to write it all down word for word, but you might simply say antithesis is a rhetorical figure. You mention one thing, you mention another, and they tend to be opposites. Okay, to create your own working definition. So pause the screen and do that, and then we're going to do some activities to practice. Okay, guys, so we have a list here of very famous examples of antithesis. Okay, so these are some really famous, I see Katy Perry, and I'm retracting my statement. These are well-known, these are famous statements and examples of antithesis. Now, your job is to circle or highlight the opposites that prove these are examples of antithesis. Okay, so the very first one is the hardest one, actually. So I've done this one as an example. So it's from William Shakespeare's Macbeth. Remember, you'll be looking at that closely next year. And it says, there are daggers in men's smiles. So the opposite there is a smile and a dagger. Why? Because a smile is associated with something positive. Yep, it's a display of something, it's a happiness. We smile to show kindness, to show good intent. But actually the opposite is that there's daggers in men's smiles, that really men are hiding a desire to kill or hurt. So it's like that lovely duality that humans have. Yep, on one hand I'm smiling, on the other hand I'm planning to kill you. Okay, so there's our antithesis. There are daggers in men's smiles. Now for the others, as I read through them, just list. So again, you have to write the whole thing out, what you think the opposites are, okay? So from Charles Dickens, A Tale of Two Cities, it was the best of times, it was the worst of times. It was the age of wisdom, it was the age of foolishness. It was the epoch of belief, it was the epoch of incredulity. So in that one, actually, there are three pairs, there are three groups of opposites, okay? So just write them down. We'll go through our answers together in a minute. Okay, now from that DC comic, Green Lantern. In brightest day, in blackest night, no evil shall escape my sight. So which are the opposites in that one? So just make a little list or just write down the opposites that you can see. What about the next one, sorry, from the very famous Katy Perry. You're hot, then you're cold. You're yes, then you're no. You're in, then you're out. You're up, then you're down. So again, antithesis is all about looking for the opposites, guys, okay? So next one from T.S. Eliot, an incredibly famous, highly known poet. T.S. Eliot's Four Quartets. In my beginning is my end. Okay, just write down the opposite for that one. And last but not least, from Martin Luther King, we must all learn to live together as brothers, or we will all perish as fools. So just going to pause the screen, look through those. Now, don't write the whole quote out. You just need to make a list of the opposites, or if you're somebody that works on screen, just circle the opposites. And we'll have a go through those answers together in a minute. Okay, so let's look at Charles Dickens quickly. I'm going to say the word, you shout the opposite to me. It was the best. So which word does he use as the antithesis, the opposite to best? Brilliant, worst. It was the best of times. It was the worst of times. Now, he establishes a pattern, actually. So he says it was the age of wisdom. So what's the opposite? What's he setting up as an opposite to wisdom? It was the age of foolishness. Brilliant. So best and worst, wisdom and foolishness. Now, it was the epoch of belief. It was the epoch of incredulity. Now, you could have done this one without even maybe knowing what some of these words meant, but following the pattern. So epoch, actually, just to give you a little bit of knowledge here, means a period in history, a period in time, and it can be for a culture, it can be for a group, it can be for an individual. So it was a time of belief. It was the time of incredulity. Now, if we're doing opposites, what's the opposite of believing in something, of belief? Yeah, you're right. So incredulity actually is very similar in meaning to disbelief. It's the state of being unwilling or unable to believe something. So Charles Dickens was saying that at the beginning of this novel, A Tale of Two Cities, it was a time of great conflict. Okay, there's huge opposition within the city, within the culture. It was the best, it was the worst. It was a time of wisdom, of foolishness. It was a time of belief and incredulity and disbelief. Okay, brilliant. Okay, Green Lantern. I say brightest, you say? Yeah, blackest. Brightest to blackest. Okay, now there's a whole list of this, and try and read this out loud without singing. You're lucky I did. Hot, cold. Brilliant. Yes, no. In, brilliant. Out, up, down. Excellent. Okay, now just to show you can achieve that antithesis within one sentence, within one idea, like we did at the beginning. In my beginning is my end. Brilliant. And then brothers and fools.